The first thing people remember about a winter night drive is not the silence but the weight of it. Snow muffles the world, swallowing sound, swallowing movement, swallowing every sign of life until only the road and the driver remain. Out there in the blackness, headlights carve narrow tunnels of light through an ocean of white, and the driver realizes how thin the boundary is between safety and the endless dark pressing in from both sides. Every winter, cars vanish on roads like these. Sometimes they are found buried under snow, engines still warm. Other times the cars are discovered abandoned, doors left ajar, tracks leading off into the trees where no one should have gone. What forces someone to step away from the last pocket of warmth in a world of ice and silence? That is the question investigators never answer, because the people they search for never return. The road is more than asphalt. At night in winter, it becomes a stage where human fear collides with the elements. Those who have lived near forest highways speak of it in whispers. They say the cold is not the only thing that waits for travelers, that the snow has memory, that the trees carry echoes, that sometimes, if you are unlucky, you glimpse something moving just outside the glow of your headlights, keeping pace, watching, never stopping. And the most unnerving detail of all, drivers who later recount these encounters insist they were not hallucinations brought on by fatigue or frost. They insist the figure stepped closer, that it touched the glass, that it wanted them to open the door. One case, told quietly in truck stops and roadside diners, begins with an ordinary commute on an icy evening. A man heading home after a long shift at work drove alone across a stretch of wilderness highway. It was late enough that the sky had closed in like a black wall, the moon hidden behind thick cloud. His tires crunched over frozen snow, his headlights cutting only a few feet ahead, when he saw what looked like a person standing by the roadside. No vehicle, no tracks, no sign of life except for that solitary figure. As his car slowed, the man noticed the figure was not bundled in coats or hats. It stood barefoot in the snow, its face pale and blank, its body turned slightly toward the trees as if waiting for something. He did not stop. He did not lower the window. He pressed the accelerator and drove on, his heart hammering in his chest. When he dared to look into the rearview mirror, the figure was gone. He told no one for weeks, fearing the ridicule of coworkers, but he never again drove that road after sundown. Stories like this do not fade because they carry an element of truth that is more terrifying than fiction. Roads are liminal spaces. They exist between destinations, cutting through wilderness and shadow, always promising passage but never safety. When the snow falls heavy and night stretches long, those roads become traps. A single wrong turn, a moment of drowsiness, a patch of black ice, and the car spins out, sliding into silence. For the driver, there is no choice but to leave the vehicle and seek help on foot. But in temperatures that can freeze skin in minutes, survival becomes unlikely. And yet, when bodies are recovered, search teams sometimes find them far from the road, deep in the trees, as though drawn there by something unseen. Why? The questions echo like the wind between the pines. Why did they leave the path? Why did they not walk toward lights, but instead into shadows? There's a quote whispered among locals in snowy regions, a line passed down like a warning. The road will not keep you, the forest will take you. It is less superstition than bitter observation. Every year, travelers vanish in these conditions. Some are explained away with terms like disorientation, hypothermia, or hallucinations. But those explanations cannot account for the footprints that lead halfway into the woods and then stop. They cannot account for the calls made from cell phones that ping towers miles from the vehicle, in places no road reaches. They cannot account for the frozen faces found with expressions of terror, mouths open in silent screams. If winter teaches anything, it is that human life is fragile and the night is endless. But some insist the night contains more than cold. One investigator once asked a haunting question while reviewing the case of a family whose car was found abandoned on a desolate winter road, belongings scattered, doors open to the storm. If the cold was enough to kill them, why did their tracks look like they were fleeing? That single question lingered long after the case file was closed. Because what if they were running not from the cold but from something in the dark that no one else saw? And so the story begins where all winter night drives begin, with a driver alone, headlights flickering against endless trees, silence pressing in like a weight. A journey that should have been ordinary transforms into something timeless, something that still unsettles anyone who listens. Out there on those empty roads, the real horror is not always the storm or the ice. It is the possibility that something else moves in the dark, patient and waiting, searching for the next set of headlights to follow. What do you do when you realize that the snow is not silent, that the trees are not empty, and that the cold is not the only thing pressing against the glass? The remote winter highways that cut through forests and frozen plains carry histories older than the asphalt itself. Long before engines rumbled across them, these paths were trodden by hunters, traders, and wanderers who knew the dangers that snow and silence could bring. In the old days, before headlights and paved lines, people carried lanterns through forests where even the flames seemed reluctant to burn against the cold. The stories of those times were whispered around fires, accounts of travelers who never returned, of shapes glimpsed between the trees, of voices calling out in the night that belonged to no one living. Generations passed and the world modernized, but the old warnings remained. They became half-remembered tales, folded into the culture of rural towns. Do not travel after dusk in winter, parents warned. Do not stop for strangers. Do not follow voices that you hear in the snow. The official record begins with accidents. Local newspapers from decades ago are filled with brief, clipped reports. Driver found frozen near stalled vehicle. Family missing after attempting to cross mountain road during storm. Unidentified body discovered off highway. Cause of death unknown. Each of these lines is stark, clinical, stripped of the terror behind them. They do not capture the image of a frostbitten hand reaching toward the road, or headlights that illuminate only empty space where someone should have been. They do not explain why a car door stood open in a blizzard, or why personal belongings were found scattered on the ice as if dropped in flight. As more people moved through these regions, patterns emerged. There were always stories about certain stretches of road. Locals could point to a bend in the highway where crashes were common, or to a frozen bridge where drivers claimed to see figures standing at the edge. Truckers told each other about long hauls through desolate country, where the world outside the cab seemed to shift, where the snow seemed to carry shapes that disappeared when you blinked. One long-haul driver described a recurring vision. A woman in pale clothes walking along the road's shoulder, her head turned toward the forest, never acknowledging the truck, never leaving footprints behind. When asked why he never stopped, he gave a simple answer. Because she never looked cold. For communities built along these routes, the road became a quiet enemy. Residents avoided night travel if they could. They scheduled errands and visits during daylight, leaving the roads empty after sundown except for the occasional traveler unaware of the warnings. It was not only superstition. Police files showed spikes of accidents in winter months, a steady flow of missing person cases tied to these highways. For families who lost someone, the grief was sharpened by the lack of explanation. Relatives clung to details that did not make sense. Shoes left neatly by a snowbank, phone calls that ended in static, faint tire marks leading off into the trees. Those details became the foundation of local folklore. In one town, a mother told her children a story of a man who stopped his car because he saw another driver waving for help. The man stepped out, calling through the snow, but the figure kept walking toward the trees. He followed just for a few steps until the cold bit into him and he realized something was wrong. When he turned back, his car was gone. Only the endless white remained. Whether the story was true or not no longer mattered. It was repeated so often that it became truth enough. The lesson was always the same. If you see someone on those roads at night, keep driving. Authorities explained these disappearances with words like hypothermia and delirium. Hypothermia, they said, can make victims strip their clothes, wander in confusion, or believe they see things that are not there. That explanation satisfied the official record, but it never satisfied the people who lived there. They knew the cold could kill, but they also knew that people rarely wandered miles into the forest with bare feet and no signs of struggle. They knew that drivers who fled their cars often seemed to run, not stumble. Something in those woods drove them forward, away from safety. The question lingered, what was it? The weight of history shaped how communities saw themselves. Roadside memorials dotted the highways, wooden crosses driven into snowbanks, faded photographs laminated against the weather, stuffed animals frozen stiff against signposts. They stood as warnings as much as remembrances. Each cross whispered, someone vanished here and we never understood why. Some towns held vigils when another disappearance occurred. Candles lined the streets, their flames small and fragile against the winter wind. Local priests spoke of faith, urging strength, but their words carried unease. Even religion seemed uncertain in the face of the silence that devoured those who traveled too far. In time, Outsiders came, investigators, journalists, even amateur thrill seekers who wanted to test the stories. They brought cameras, notebooks, and determination. Some left with little more than frostbite and half-frozen equipment. Others returned with footage they swore was real. Moving shadows, figures caught just at the edge of the frame, voices on audio recorders when no one else had been near. Whether these were tricks of the environment or something more remains contested, but the effect on locals was simple. The stories spread beyond the towns, gaining new life in magazines and late-night radio shows. What had once been whispered around fires became material for documentaries and podcasts. Yet for those who lived along the roads, the attention was hollow. They did not need outsiders to tell them the highways were dangerous. They had seen too many funerals. The historical weight of these highways is not measured in statistics alone. It is measured in absence. Families remember the last time a loved one left. Headlights sweeping down the driveway, a wave through the window, a promise to return. What followed was silence, a phone call that never came, a search that ended in snow. Communities remember the hollow sound of sirens cutting through the still night air, the distant hum of helicopters combing white fields for signs of life. And they remember the silence afterward, heavier than before. Generations grow up with the understanding that these roads are not only paths between towns. They are boundaries. They divide safety from disappearance, warmth from frost, life from whatever else lingers in the trees. Every winter when the first heavy snow falls, old fears surface. People lock their doors, check their headlights, and remind each other of the same rule passed down for years. If you must travel, travel fast, travel prepared, and never stop for anything that waits at the roadside, because history has shown what happens to those who do. The mystery often begins in ordinary silence. A driver sets out on a familiar road, believing the distance between towns is nothing more than another routine stretch of travel. The fuel gauge is steady, the heater humming softly, the windshield wipers keeping rhythm against falling snow. There is nothing unusual about the start of the journey. That is the way it always begins. Innocent, predictable, a night like countless others. What makes it different is never obvious at first. It is something subtle. The way the trees seem to lean closer, the way the air feels heavier, the way the headlights reach forward but illuminate nothing beyond a thin circle of safety. On one winter night, a young man left a friend's house to drive home. The distance was short, only an hour along a snow-covered highway cutting through silent woods. He sent a message before leaving, promising to text again once he arrived. He never did. Later that night, police found his car pulled neatly onto the shoulder, engine idling, doors locked, lights still shining into the dark. There were no signs of struggle, no tracks around the vehicle, only the endless snow absorbing everything. Search teams spread through the trees, calling his name into the night. But the forest gave nothing back. Weeks later, when the snow thawed, they discovered a single glove more than 2 miles away, resting on top of a frozen stream. It was the only trace ever found. Another story is told about a woman who took a night shift at a hospital 2 towns away. She had made the drive dozens of times before. She knew every bend in the road, every cluster of evergreens, every bridge where ice collected. That night she called her sister as she drove. Her voice was calm, casual, even joking. Then the call cut out mid-sentence, not with static or fading signal, but with a sudden click. When investigators retraced her route, they found her phone lying in the snow, screen shattered as if dropped in haste. Her car was discovered days later down an embankment, but the seat was empty. No footprints led away, no blood marked the snow. It was as if she had stepped out and dissolved into the storm. The buildup of each disappearance carries patterns, but also contradictions. Cars are found with heat still radiating from the engine, but with no driver inside. Personal belongings are discovered far from where logic would place them. Scarves tangled in branches, shoes abandoned miles from the road, sometimes aligned neatly as if arranged by a hand. Even stranger are the reports from drivers who saw something before the disappearance occurred. They speak of figures standing motionless by the roadside, of lights flashing deep between the trees, of voices that sounded too close for the isolation of a winter forest. The voices always seemed familiar, like a loved one calling, like a child crying for help. Yet when the drivers stopped to listen, there was nothing. A highway patrol officer once described a scene that never left him. He had been the first to arrive at a stalled vehicle, reported by a passing trucker. The car's hazard lights blinked weakly in the falling snow, The driver's seat empty. Inside the radio played a low, distorted hum. The officer found footprints leading away from the car, disappearing into a line of dark trees. He followed them with caution, each step crunching over ice until they stopped abruptly halfway between the road and the forest. There was no sign of a fall, no break in the snow. The prints simply ended, as though the person had lifted off the ground and vanished. The officer stood in that silence for minutes, his breath sharp in the air, his pulse hammering until the sensation of being watched forced him back to the road. He filed his report, but in private conversation later admitted that he never patrolled that section of highway alone again. Each account deepens the unease because it resists explanation. Fatigue might cause a driver to pull over. Confusion from hypothermia might explain why someone wandered away. But why would they leave behind coats, hats, and phones? Why would tracks end suddenly in unbroken snow? Why would calls cut out in abrupt silence, as if severed by something more deliberate than a weak signal? And most unsettling of all, why do so many witnesses describe seeing or hearing the same shapes, the same pale figure waiting by the edge of the road, the same call luring them closer to the trees? As winter deepens, locals grow restless. They know that each new storm could bring another story. Parents warn children not to walk near the highways at night. Travelers stop at gas stations, exchanging nervous glances with strangers, as though every driver carries the same thought, that tonight could be the night something waits for them too. The mystery builds not from a single disappearance, but from the weight of repetition. Each case overlaps with the next, forming a pattern that feels less like coincidence and more like ritual. It begins with an ordinary journey. It ends with headlights shining on an empty seat, with footprints vanishing into silence, with families left waiting for answers that never come. And always, in the background, is the question that drives the fear deeper than any storm or frost. What happens in the darkness between the trees, where the snow swallows sound and time seems to pause, because whatever takes place there is what turns a simple winter night drive into something that has haunted communities for generations. The search for answers begins with fragments, reports written in clipped official language, testimony scrawled into notebooks, objects retrieved from the snow as if left behind by design. The details rarely align neatly, and yet they form a mosaic of dread that investigators and families revisit year after year. Each case carries small pieces that refuse to be explained, each clue hinting at a truth larger than the record will admit. One police file from a disappearance described the discovery of tire tracks that swerved abruptly, as though the driver had reacted to something on the road. The tracks ended where the vehicle had rolled gently into a snowbank, headlights still burning. Inside the car, the radio was tuned to static. A half-eaten sandwich sat in the passenger seat untouched. No sign of violence, no forced entry. But just beyond the car, searchers found prints in the snow leading toward the trees. The first sets were clear, the weight of boots pressing deeply into fresh powder. Then after 20 paces, they changed. The stride lengthened. The prints grew lighter, shallower, until they vanished altogether on a flat stretch of unbroken white. The search team swept the area, circling outward for miles, but the tracks never resumed. It was as if the person had walked into air. Other clues defy the cold logic of survival. A young woman's scarf, discovered knotted carefully around a low branch 2 miles from her abandoned car. A pair of shoes left side by side on a frozen creek, no footprints around them, as if the owner had placed them there deliberately before stepping into nothing. Phones found with batteries drained, not slowly but all at once, the way devices sometimes fail when an electrical surge tears through circuits. In one case, a recording was retrieved from such a phone. It was short, a burst of sound lasting only seconds, heavy breathing, the crunch of hurried steps, and then, faintly, something like a second set of footsteps following behind. Witness testimony adds layers that twist the narrative further. A truck driver reported seeing a figure in pale clothing, standing at the edge of the forest the night a man disappeared. Another motorist swore she saw someone waving for help on the shoulder, only for the figure to vanish when her headlights drew near. One of the most chilling accounts came from a snowplow operator who worked the highway in the early hours. He claimed he saw a person walking in the center of the road, facing away from him. He slowed, honked, flashed lights, but the figure did not move. When he braked to a stop, it dissolved into a flurry of snow, leaving nothing behind. Experts brought in to explain these reports often reached for familiar terms. Hypothermia can trigger irrational behavior, they said. Victims strip clothing, wander, become disoriented. Fatigue can induce hallucinations, tricks of shadow and light that make empty roads feel populated. Isolation itself bends the mind, and yet the evidence resists those explanations. Hypothermia does not cause footprints to vanish. Fatigue does not drain batteries in an instant. Shadows do not leave physical objects arranged in ways that suggest intention. A psychologist who reviewed the testimonies noted the common thread: the sense of being lured. Nearly every witness described the same impulse, subtle but undeniable. The feeling that someone was just beyond sight, waiting to be followed. It was less a vision and more an invitation. Survivors who resisted it recalled overwhelming urges to open their doors, to step out, to follow the sound of a voice that felt familiar. The psychologist suggested it could be a manifestation of the human brain under stress, a cruel mirage created by fear and isolation. But then he paused. Because how could so many different people in different years, in different storms, describe the same thing? Artifacts deepen the unease. Personal effects are not scattered randomly. They appear placed. A wallet tucked into the crook of a tree branch. A photograph pinned under a stone on the roadside. In one chilling case, a child's toy was found sitting upright in the snow a full mile from the family car, its face turned toward the forest. These details raise questions investigators cannot ignore. Did the victims leave these markers themselves, trying to guide searchers? Or were they arranged afterward by someone or something that wanted the trail to remain incomplete? Conflicting data multiplies the mystery. Autopsy reports on recovered bodies note cause of death as hypothermia, exposure, or cardiac arrest brought on by stress. But some bodies were found lying face down in shallow snow with no signs of struggle, as though lowered gently. Others bore expressions of sheer terror, mouths frozen open, eyes wide, hands clawed as if reaching for something unseen. There are no official categories for that kind of evidence. It lingers on the margins of reports, whispered among searchers after long nights combing forests that do not yield answers. The deeper investigators dig, the less stable the ground becomes. Every explanation collides with contradictions. Every clue branches into multiple interpretations. The tracks that end suddenly, the voices that draw travelers away, the belongings found arranged instead of lost, and the silence that hangs over all of it heavier than snow, the silence that no expert can explain. At the heart of the analysis lies a question colder than any storm. Are these cases simply the byproduct of human fragility against the winter night? Or do the clues point toward something older? Something that waits in the spaces where roads carve through wilderness? No report has ever been able to answer. The most chilling part of these stories is not found in the reports or the scattered belongings or the vanished footprints. It lies in the silence that follows. The silence that settles over families and communities once the searches end, and the snow covers everything again. The physical traces may disappear, but the weight of absence does not. It lingers in living rooms where chairs remain empty, in bedrooms where coats still hang by the door, in phones that never ring again. For the families, the road does not just claim bodies, it claims the very rhythm of their lives. Parents speak of hearing phantom sounds long after their child vanished. The buzz of headlights pulling into the driveway, the slam of a car door, footsteps crunching up the walk. They rise from bed expecting reunion, only to face the hollow truth that the house is still. Wives keep watching the curve of the road outside their windows, waiting for beams of light that never return. Children grow up with their last memories frozen. A father waving goodbye from behind frosted glass, a mother promising to be home before midnight. For them, time halts. They inherit not closure but a void. This emotional impact reaches beyond individual households. Small towns carry the weight communally. People who have never lost anyone still feel it when winter descends. They adjust their routines, avoid certain stretches of highway, whisper warnings to neighbors. Fear becomes a shared inheritance, and with it grows a quiet paranoia, an instinctive distrust of the night roads. In places where everyone knows someone who has vanished, the landscape itself feels cursed. Forests are no longer neutral. They are eyes watching. The snow is no longer beautiful. It is a shroud. Psychologists who study these communities often focus on trauma. They describe the lingering symptoms as something close to collective post-traumatic stress. People hear sounds in the wind that resemble voices. They feel eyes on them during short walks between car and house. Sleep is light, restless, broken by dreams where headlights cut through endless white, but never reach safety. Some individuals develop habits they cannot explain. Checking locks multiple times, refusing to step outside after dusk, even keeping packed bags by the door in case escape becomes necessary. But there is more than trauma here. There is also deterioration. Families without closure sink into suspicion and conflict. When a loved one is lost without explanation, blame often falls inward. A parent wonders if they could have stopped their child from leaving that night. A spouse replays arguments, believing anger drove their partner onto the road. A sibling remembers ignoring a phone call and tortures themselves with the thought that it might have been a final plea for help. These thoughts corrode relationships. Marriages collapse. Families fracture. Entire lines of trust disintegrate under the pressure of unanswered questions. Some who have lost relatives describe hearing their voices in the snow. Not in dreams, not in memory, but in waking moments. A man shoveling his driveway stops because he hears his wife calling his name, soft but urgent just beyond the tree line. A woman claims she woke to hear her son's laughter outside the window, though the night was empty. These experiences are dismissed as grief-born hallucinations, but those who experience them insist they were real. The voices felt too clear, too deliberate, too near. What terrifies them most is not the possibility of madness, but the possibility that something in the night continues to mimic the people they loved. Communities live under that shadow. It is not only the disappearances that haunt them, but the way memory itself seems poisoned. In towns where winter roads have claimed too many, people hesitate to trust even their own senses. Was that figure by the tree line only a trick of the snow? Was that sound of footsteps just shifting ice? When paranoia takes root, reality becomes unstable. The mind begins to fracture. Even those who return from near misses carry scars. Survivors who pulled over, who felt the urge to step out but resisted, speak in hollow voices. They describe feeling as if something had pressed against the car, circling, waiting for the door to open. One man swore he saw a face in his window's reflection, one that did not belong to him. He never drove alone at night again. Another woman admitted that she still hears her own name whispered whenever she drives in snow, a sound so faint that she cannot prove it is real, yet so distinct that she cannot ignore it. The psychological impact spreads like frostbite, unseen at first but deadly once it sets in. Whole towns become shaped by fear. They avoid travel after dark. They warn strangers, they teach children rules that sound like folklore but are rooted in survival. And yet, despite the caution, each winter someone else is taken. Each winter the cycle renews, the trauma deepens, and the silence grows heavier. The most disturbing question for those left behind is not how their loved ones died, but why they seemed to flee. Why did they abandon warmth, safety, reason, and walk willingly into the night? What voice or vision compelled them to leave? The inability to answer breeds obsession. Family members pore over maps, comb through reports, chase rumors of sightings, cling to theories that contradict each other. Some even drive the roads themselves at night, retracing the final journeys, waiting for the moment when headlights will reveal what their loved ones saw. They rarely last long. Most return pale, shaken, unwilling to speak about what they felt out there. In the end, what haunts most is not death but choice. The realization that the missing were not simply victims of storm or ice, but participants in their own vanishing. That they heard something or saw something that convinced them to leave everything behind. That they did not resist. That they stepped willingly into silence. For those left behind, that knowledge is unbearable. Because it means that the night roads are not just killers, they are seducers. And no one can explain what they promise to those who listen. The investigation into these winter night disappearances has always existed in tension, caught between the rational explanations that authorities insist upon and the whispered theories that survivors and locals cannot shake. Every official inquiry begins with the same tone. Accidents caused by ice, fatigue, alcohol, or equipment failure. Yet when the reports pile up, one after another, patterns emerge that those sterile explanations cannot contain. And so investigators, journalists, and even families have turned to deeper, more disturbing possibilities. The first and most common theory remains the human one, hypothermia, with its cruel trick of causing victims to strip their clothing, wander disoriented and imagine voices where none exist, explains many cases on paper. Fatigue, too, is blamed for hallucinations of roadside figures or phantom lights in the trees. Investigators point to stress, alcohol consumption, or the psychological strain of isolation. For the files, it is neat, acceptable, and complete. But the neatness itself is unsettling. Because the details are not neat, tracks vanish. Objects appear arranged. Calls cut out with sudden clarity instead of fading. Theories of hypothermia and exhaustion leave those edges untouched, like shadows in the corners of a brightly lit room. A second theory stretches deeper into cultural memory. Locals sometimes speak of the forest as if it holds will and intent. Long before highways carved through the wilderness, the land was seen as alive, spirits lingering in the pines, voices carried in the wind. Those who repeat these beliefs claim that the disappearances are not random but ritualistic, that the road itself is a lure, a vein of human passage cutting through the body of something older, something that resents the intrusion. In this view, the voices people hear in the snow are not hallucinations, but imitations, echoes crafted to draw travelers away from their vehicles deeper into silence, where they can be claimed. One investigator once noted a strange pattern. Many disappearances occurred near landmarks with history, old burial grounds, forgotten settlements, or stretches of forest avoided by hunters for generations. Coincidence, the official record says, but for those who live nearby, the connection is not easily dismissed. They call those places the hungry fields. Another theory belongs less to folklore and more to the modern world of conspiracy. Some argue that these vanishings are not paranormal at all but deliberate, that people disappear because they are taken. The isolation of winter highways offers perfect cover for abductions. No witnesses, no cameras, no sound but wind. Proponents of this theory point to belongings found arranged neatly, to prints that end suddenly, to phones cut off with surgical precision. These, they argue, are not signs of frost or fatigue but of human hands interfering. Yet this raises questions even darker. Who is taking them, and why do so many disappearances leave no trace of pursuit or struggle? Still others turn to something even more inexplicable. They suggest that the vanishings mark thin places in the world, gaps where reality itself falters. That people step onto a patch of road where the rules shift, where the line between here and elsewhere bends. It would explain the abrupt ends of footprints, the objects left behind as if dropped mid-step, the way time seems to collapse in certain accounts. It would also explain why bodies are sometimes found miles from where logic would place them, as though distance itself had unraveled. This theory lives mostly in the margins, discussed late at night by those who admit they do not believe it but cannot dismiss it either. Investigations continue each winter. Police comb forests, track dogs search frozen fields, helicopters sweep the white expanses with thermal cameras. Yet for every clue recovered, more questions emerge. Reports contradict each other. Witnesses insist on details that do not align with physical evidence. Theories pile upon theories, none of them complete, and each season as the snow deepens, another driver vanishes, and the cycle begins again. One chilling aspect of these investigations is how they end. Files are closed with phrases like, "no foul play suspected" or "presumed hypothermia." But beneath the words lies the unspoken acknowledgement, they did not find enough. Not enough tracks, not enough remains, not enough answers. The silence swallows the rest. For families, these conclusions feel like abandonment. For locals, they feel like confirmation, that the authorities cannot protect them, cannot even explain what stalks their roads. And so the theories persist. Rational ones, folkloric ones, conspiratorial ones. Each attempts to stitch together a pattern from fragments that resist order. Each fails in its own way, leaving gaps that remain haunting. Perhaps the most unsettling truth is that all of them could hold pieces. Hypothermia explains some, but not all. Folklore provides a framework for the lure, but not the physical traces. Conspiracy offers intention, but not silence. And thin places explain the vanishings, but not the objects left behind. The investigations circle endlessly, never reaching a center. Perhaps because there is no center. Perhaps because the winter night road is itself the answer. A liminal place where human reason falters, where the world narrows to a tunnel of headlights and the unknown presses against the glass. What drives someone to leave that tunnel, to step willingly into the snow? That question has guided every theory, every investigation, every sleepless night spent combing through reports, and it remains unanswered. Because the road does not explain. The road only takes. What endures after the roads are cleared, after the reports are filed, after the families go home and the snow closes over the last trace of a vanished life, is not relief, but an echo. It is the knowledge that the story is not finished. Because the winter highways do not give endings. They give silences. They give shadows at the edge of vision. They give the unsettling certainty that someone else right now is driving a stretch of dark road and will not make it to the other side. For those who live near these routes, the memory returns with every season. The first heavy snowfall triggers unease as much as beauty. Roads gleam white under moonlight, but no one calls them pure. They call them waiting. The silence feels thick, as though the forest has stopped to listen, and the headlights of each passing car become a fragile shield against something just beyond reach. Theories and investigations attempt to offer order, but order fails in the face of repetition. A family vanishes in 1967. A driver abandons his car in 1983. A young woman's phone call cuts into static in 1999. A trucker sees a figure dissolve into snow in 2015. The dates change, the vehicles modernize, but the rhythm remains the same. Someone leaves, someone is found, someone is never recovered. The story is not bound by time. It simply waits, stretching itself across decades like ice across a river. Even those who do not believe in folklore feel the pull of something unresolved. Investigators confess that cases haunt them years after retirement. Searchers admit they avoid certain roads even in daylight. Survivors replay every second of their brush with disappearance, wondering if they were one decision away from never returning. In their voices is not certainty but guilt, the guilt of having glimpsed something and escaped while others did not. The larger question is not who or what waits along the highways. The larger question is why the silence endures. Why no conclusive proof emerges? Why the clues contradict? Why no one ever sees the moment of vanishing, only the aftermath? Some argue that the forest itself is complicit, swallowing tracks and muffling cries. Others suggest the human mind cannot process what happens, that memory collapses when confronted with something it cannot contain. Whatever the cause, the result is the same. A story that circles endlessly without a conclusion, and perhaps that is why the tale endures. Because the horror is not in resolution but in absence. People can accept tragedy when it is complete. A body found, a cause determined, a death named. But when nothing is given back, when the road itself seems to erase, the fear multiplies. It leaves not only grief, but the possibility that anyone at any time could join the silence. That possibility transforms the winter night drive into more than travel. It becomes a gamble. Every mile is a negotiation between human fragility and the unknown. The heater hums, the headlights stretch forward, the tires hum over asphalt, and in every heartbeat is the awareness that the tunnel of safety is temporary, that beyond the glass the darkness is limitless, that all it takes is one glance too long, one sound too familiar, one step outside, and the road takes another name into its silence. Communities live with this truth, and they live with it differently than outsiders. Tourists read the stories and shiver. Podcasters tell them for thrill. But the locals drive past roadside crosses and do not look away. They recognize the photographs fading on weathered wood. They remember who those people were. They remember the last time they saw them alive. And they know that every winter the highway may choose again. What haunts is not only the thought of figures in the snow, or voices calling from the forest. What haunts is the thought that the missing did not resist, that they stepped out willingly, that they walked into the night as though answering a call no one else could hear. It is not the violence of their end that unsettles. It is the seduction of it, the suggestion that anyone could hear that same voice and follow, and so the reflection closes where it began. With a road stretched across silence, with headlights tunneling through dark, with a driver alone against the void, perhaps nothing waits out there but frost and fatigue. Perhaps the stories are only grief reshaping itself into ghosts, or perhaps there is something older, something that wears the voices of the familiar, something that lingers by the roadside and waits with infinite patience. What do you do when you realize the snow is not silent, the trees are not empty, and the cold is not the only thing pressing against the glass? That is the question no one answers. That is the question that keeps the highways haunted, long after the engines cool and the families stop searching. And it is the question that waits for anyone who finds themselves alone on a winter night, headlights swallowed by darkness, wondering if they will see the other side.